Good morning, everyone. Before our program gets underway, I would like to note that simultaneous translation is being provided in Spanish on Channel 4. Hay traducción simultánea al español que se puede encontrar en el Canal 4, en los auriculares en su asiento. And for the two presentations that will not be given in English, but in Spanish, there will likewise be simultaneous translation on Channel 1, so Channel 4 for Spanish and Channel 1 for English. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, panelists, dear ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your presence this morning for this conference on defending religious freedom and other human rights, stopping mass atrocities against Christians and other believers, sponsored by the Permanent Observer Mission of the Holy See to the United Nations in conjunction with co-sponsors Citizen Go, Más Libres, and In Defense of Christians. When Pope Francis spoke to the General Assembly of the United Nations last September 25, he renewed what he called his repeated appeals regarding the painful situation of the entire Middle East, North Africa, and other African countries where Christians, together with other cultural or ethnic groups, and even members of the majority religion who have no desire to be caught up in hatred and folly, have been forced to witness the destruction of their places of worship, their cultural and religious heritage, their houses and property, and have faced the alternative either of fleeing or of paying for their adhesion to good and to peace by their own lives or by enslavement. He said these realities should serve as a grave summons to an examination of conscience on the part of those charged with the conduct of international affairs, and added the most basic understanding of human dignity compels the international community, particularly through the norms and mechanisms of international law, to do all it can to stop and to prevent further systematic violence against ethnic and religious minorities and to protect innocent peoples. Sadly, even as we speak, the systematic violence against ethnic and religious minorities and others in many parts of the world is very much ongoing. So we will today hear directly from those who have had to endure the violence personally and from parents who lost their daughter to ISIS atrocities. We will also listen to the stories of ones who ministered to the victims and who have come here to share with us their experiences. We will hear from experts who will help us contextualize what has happened and describe the various steps, big and small, that need to be taken to protect those being terrorized, to end violence, and to hold accountable those who have been flaunting the human rights. We will listen to some who have been involved at the political and diplomatic levels in achieving appropriate condemnations of what has been taking place and strengthening the political resolve needed urgently to end violence and suffering. And through all the speakers, we will hopefully hear also the cries of the victims, children, old people, wives and husbands, mothers and fathers, millions of human beings just like us and our family and friends whose lives have been torn apart by the sadism of those who prey upon, torture, enslave, violate, and kill the innocent. There is no way we can cover everything that needs to be said in the span of a 3-hour event. There is no way we can do justice to every ethnic and religious group that has been targeted for expulsion or persecution. But what we hope to accomplish is that through the particulars that we will have time to examine, not only to raise awareness about similar suffering anywhere and everywhere it is occurring, but also to raise up what Pope Francis calls in his UN address the effective, practical, and constant will necessary to stop these outrages against human dignity. To end the atrocities we will be examining today requires the involvement of everyone. Certainly, the international community represented here at the United Nations has an indispensable leadership role. Certainly, political and religious leaders must step up to the plate. Humanitarian organizations must dig even deeper to be adequate to the enormous humanitarian crisis being engendered. But the magnitude and the downright savagery of what is going on requires the whole world to wake up, to need to get involved. For when human dignity is being treated with such contempt, it is in these broad theaters the world must become a global neighborhood in solidarity. So many people in this ECOSOC chamber today and the organizations they represent are on the front lines in this most noble and urgent life and death effort. It is my honor to be in their presence. We thank them for all that they are doing and for the example they set for all of us and for the entire international community. As their presence provides us an opportunity to find out more about their work, it also gives us a chance to assist and augment their life-saving mission in defense of the innocent. Thank you once again for coming, for your interest in the plight of those suffering from violent extremism, and for all you are doing and will do in order to respond to what Pope Francis terms the grave summons that requires us to do all we can to protect those in harm's way. Once again, welcome. Our first keynote speaker is Ambassador Ufuk Guchen, a citizen of Turkey and permanent observer of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation to the United Nations. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Archbishop Auza. Ladies and gentlemen, greetings in the name of peace. I'm grateful to my friend Archbishop Auza for inviting me to this important event. I have always thought that OIC and Holy See should join forces to promote messages of peace, compassion, and coexistence. In my Huffington Post article in November 2013, I wrote, I quote, "In terms of perceived fault lines in Africa and the need to protect Christian minorities in Muslim-majority countries, political dialogue and practical cooperation between the Holy See and the OIC could be very useful. Both could jointly encourage targeted interfaith action in conflict areas," unquote. I also wish to reiterate what I stated in my intervention at the UN Security Council Open Debate on 27th of March 2015 on the victims of attacks and abuses on ethnic and religious grounds in the Middle East. I quote, "Christians in the Middle East are constituent components of their nations as citizens who have or should have equal rights to security, welfare, and decent life, like other compatriots of theirs. They have been an integral part of the social fabric, culture, struggles, achievements, as well as past and future narratives of their nations. Additionally, in line with the deep-rooted tradition of coexistence in the region, Christian clergy in Iraq and Syria lived with honor and dignity and enthusiastically shared aspirations of their nations for peace and prosperity. As a matter of fact, religious and ethnic minorities in the Middle East are valuable assets for their countries. It would be a great loss for the countries as well as for the entire humanity if precious examples of religious pluralism, harmonious coexistence, and multiculturalism of the region are lost," unquote. Ladies and gentlemen, what has been endured by vulnerable communities from Nigeria to Iraq, from Libya to Syria, at the hands of bigots and enemies of humanity, have shaken our conscience. How can we forget what has been done to Yazidi girls and women? It is required that we act in determination and solidarity to combat the dark forces. As for the victims of outrageous crimes, due to hypersensitivities and emotions involved, and without any disrespect, my humble message would be to continue to speak up, to raise awareness about the crimes committed, and ask for accountability, but also show empathy for and solidarity with other communities who suffered. This is not a struggle between Muslims and Christians, but a struggle between humanity and enemies of humanity. I should underline that OIC Secretary General on every occasion publicly condemned the inhuman acts of Daesh and forced displacement, which he qualified as a crime that cannot be tolerated. OIC on every occasion stated that practices of Daesh have nothing to do with Islam and its principles, that call for justice, kindness, fairness, freedom of faith, and coexistence. Naturally, in the face of horrible crimes perpetrated with the false and illegitimate pretense that they are acting in the name of Islam, particularly the vulnerable communities at the receiving end of these horrible crimes would rightly ask us what we are doing other than condemnation. As a response to this question, I could say that in cooperation with the international community, we are doing everything possible to delegitimize and discredit the arguments of not only Daesh, but also other terrorist groups such as Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab, who are hijacking Islam to manipulate young minds around the world. Certainly, the challenge we face is an existential one for many of our member states. As a matter of fact, defining struggles are going on in Muslim-majority countries towards promotion of democracy, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, pluralism, empowerment of civil society, women and youth, as well as against terrorism and radical forces. In this particular period in our history, showing empathy towards the concerns of all communities and cherishing compassion and respect for every single human being and upholding the sacredness of every individual's human life and dignity without any discrimination will surely enhance the prospects of peace and stability for the future. Taking this opportunity, I would like to commend the efforts of prominent Islamic scholar Sheikh Abdullah bin Baya, President of the Forum for Promoting Peace in Muslim Societies, and the Moroccan Minister of Endowment and Islamic Affairs for the successful convening of the Marrakesh Conference on January 25th to 27. In Marrakesh, Muslim leaders from around the world adopted a historic declaration defending the rights of minorities in predominantly Muslim countries. The Marrakesh Declaration is based on the Medina Charter, a constitutional contract between Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the people of Medina, guaranteeing religious liberty for all, regardless of faith, 1,400 years ago. The Marrakesh Declaration maintains that states have an obligation to foster cooperation between religious communities. I believe that it is quite significant development that the last OIC summit held in Istanbul on 14 to 15 April 2016 endorsed the Marrakesh Declaration. Now, promotion and implementation of the Marrakesh Declaration will be important, particularly through local efforts and messages of the religious leaders. Naturally, next phases will also be important, particularly providing full citizenship rights, thus full protection. Lastly, I should commend the efforts of UNDP, Alliance of Civilizations, UNESCO, UN Special Advisor Mr. Adama Dieng, Network for Religious and Traditional Peacemakers, KAISIT, Religions for Peace, and other partners such as USIP and San Egidio Community, who have been making considerable efforts to promote peaceful and inclusive societies. I should also add that we will hear more about specific initiatives of the OIC member states during the President of General Assembly's high-level event titled Religions for Peace and sponsored by Kazakhstan to be held on 6th of May. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Gokcin, for your powerful words and for the Organization of Islamic Cooperation's strong condemnation of extremist violence and defense of human dignity. Now, I am pleased to give the floor to Mr. Carl Anderson, Supreme Knight of the Knights of Columbus, the world's largest Catholic fraternal organization, 1.9 million members strong, that not only has been responding to the cries for help coming from the Middle East and elsewhere, but used its resources to put together a compelling 300-page report on the violence against Christians in the Middle East that compelled U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry to declare what was happening to Christians, Yazidis, and other religious minorities in the region as genocide. Mr. Supreme Knight, you have the floor.
Your Excellency, thank you very much. The world's greatest humanitarian crisis since World War II is unfolding today in the Middle East. Hundreds of thousands of people in Syria and Iraq have lost their lives. Entire communities have been displaced or wiped out, while neighboring communities and cultures strain to accept millions of people fleeing years of war and terrorism. We face the very real prospect of the extinction of many of the communities indigenous to the region. This crisis implores all people of goodwill to unite in a solidarity of conscience. We must build a worldwide effort to save the historic, indigenous, minority communities of the region, regardless of their race, ethnicity, or religion. The Knights of Columbus is committed to this great cause. Since 2014, we have raised more than $10.5 million for relief, assisting Christians and other internally displaced persons and refugees in Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon. And we have partnered with dioceses and religious agencies working in the region to provide general relief, food, clothing, shelter, education, and medical care. In addition to charitable work, in the United States, we advocated for designations of genocide by the Congress and the Department of State. In support of these declarations, we conducted an extensive public awareness campaign and, at the request of State Department officials, produced an extensive report on the genocide against Christians, credited by both members of Congress and officials at the Department of State with being instrumental in their determinations that genocide is being committed against Christians and other religious minorities in the region. Our nearly 300-page report, submitted to the Department of State on March 9th and subsequently to members of Congress, both documented the atrocities and laid out the legal analysis supporting the conclusion that genocide is occurring. And it showed that terms like religious cleansing or crimes against humanity are by themselves inadequate to describe both the magnitude of the tragedy and the clear intent of the perpetrators. The State Department's declaration of genocide on March 17th marked only the second time that such a determination has been made by the U.S. government while the crime is occurring. The Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide and the U.S. law based upon it require the commission of intentional acts to destroy a group in whole or in part. The in-part destruction of the group or its mass deportation is sufficient for a finding of genocide. Mass deportations, too, are consistent with such a finding. ISIS and the victims we interviewed agree on one thing. Many of those targeted were targeted because of their Christian faith. The terror group's magazine, Dabiq, is named for the place where its leadership believes it will win a decisive battle against what it describes as the army of Rome, destroying the Crusader army. Obviously an unmistakable Christian reference. And last year it published a picture of Pope Francis, describing him as the Crusader Pope. The magazine has stated, "We will conquer your Rome, break your crosses, and enslave your women. And if we do not reach that time, then our children and grandchildren will reach it, and they will sell your sons as slaves at the slave market." That statement is just one of many. A recent ISIS video from Libya states, "Fight and kill them," from their great priest to the most pathetic one, adding, "Terrorize the Jews and burn the slaves of the cross." The predecessors of ISIS, the Islamic State in Iraq and Al-Qaeda in Iraq, also targeted Christians. And ISIS leader Abu Ammar al-Baghdadi stated nearly a decade ago that Christians no longer qualify for tolerance under Islamic law. Under his leadership in 2010, Our Lady of Salvation Church in Baghdad was attacked, killing dozens of Catholic Christians. And among the claims made by the gunman was that all of the Christians were infidels and it is permitted to kill them. Since that time, as we know, such attacks have increased in scale and intensity. Our recent fact-finding mission to Iraq found evidence of widespread rape, kidnapping, forced conversions, slavery, murder, property confiscation, and forced expulsion. Many of the incidents had not been previously reported, but based on what we learned, it is our impression that what we know today is likely to be only the tip of the iceberg. A concerted, sustained effort now needs to be undertaken to document the extent of this tragedy. Those we interviewed showed great strength. Some showed great heroism. For example, Kalia, a woman in her 50s, was held hostage along with 47 others in Iraq. During her 15 days in captivity, she endured demands to convert to Islam with a gun to her head and a sword to her neck. She physically resisted ISIS militants who attempted to rape hostage girls and tried to take a 9-year-old girl as a bride. And she endured multiple beatings for her efforts. Although 14 men in the group were coerced into saying they would convert to Islam, Kalia did not. She told her captives that since Jesus had died for her, she was willing to die for him. Ultimately, she was not killed, but was left in the desert to walk to Erbil. Refugees told us that her heroic resistance had saved many people. We know that ISIS has killed thousands of Christians in Iraq, Syria, and Libya. Mass graves have been reported in Syria, and the desert between Mosul and Erbil was littered with bodies as Christians there fled too quickly to bury neighbors and family members. Churchmen from the region, including Syriac Catholic Patriarch Yunan and archbishops from Aleppo, Erbil, and Mosul, have called what is happening to their people genocide. Adding to this witness are world leaders from Pope Francis to Angela Merkel and the governments of Iraq, the Kurdish regional government, the European Parliament, and the United States. ISIS consistently violates the 4 main goals found in the preamble to the United Nations Charter. To 1, save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. 2, protect and reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights. 3, promote justice and adherence to international law. And 4, foster development and freedom. The scourge of what is happening in Iraq and Syria is a frontal assault on fundamental human rights, freedom, and development throughout the region. Genocide has special meaning for Christians in the Middle East. Almost a century ago, Raphael Lemkin formulated the concept he would later call genocide to address the killing of Christians in the region. Today, the stakes are even higher. The number of Christians in Iraq has plummeted from more than 1.5 million to as few as 200,000. In Syria, the Christian community has been decimated by 2/3, from 1.5 million to 500,000. The indigenous Christian people of the region are a vulnerable and fragile minority. Today, they are in risk of disappearing entirely. These people are among the longest standing ethnic and religious communities, not only in the region, but in the world. Religious minorities have an indisputable right to live in their homeland, and their disappearance will diminish us all. The United Nations must act to ensure that these ancient and vulnerable indigenous groups do not face extinction. The responsibility to protect was unanimously adopted by the General Assembly in 2005. It includes the pledge of all nations and the United Nations to protect populations from genocide. The document's paragraphs 138 to 140 articulate the responsibility of national governments, supported by the international community and the United Nations, to stop such crimes. A decade later, we must ensure that this unanimous commitment of the world has a meaning through concrete action. Under the auspices of the United Nations, concrete steps can be taken to make this commitment a reality. First, the Security Council should refer key perpetrators of genocide for prosecution by the International Criminal Court. Although substantial evidence of genocide already exists, further action should be taken to develop additional documentation before physical evidence is lost. Second, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees should make provisions for locating and providing relief to communities such as Yazidis and Christians that have been targeted for genocide. Many of these refugees fear going into official UN refugee camps. As a result, far too many of these genocide survivors are being overlooked, and those who wish to acquire official refugee status or immigrate find it difficult and often nearly impossible to do so. Some improvements in this situation have been made, but much more needs to be done. Third, together with governments involved in assistance or negotiations in the region, the UN should advocate for full and equal rights for religious minorities in the region. A necessary first step is to prevent genocide is to overcome the social and legal inequality that is the breeding ground for genocide. Religious hatred, discrimination, and second-class citizenship too often constitute a way of life in the region, and it is a way of life that is an antecedent to genocide. We cannot accept one standard for human rights in the region and another standard for the rest of the world. The guarantees in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, especially Article 18, and those regarding equal protection under the law and freedom of speech and religion must become a reality for all the citizens in Iraq, Syria, and Libya. The security of the region, and perhaps even the world itself, depends upon it. We must be realistic regarding the barriers to human rights in the region, but at the same time, we must keep our eyes on the prize toward which we are striving: equality of all before the law. Fourth, we must prepare now for the consequences of the liberation of ISIS-controlled areas, including Mosul and the Nineveh Plain, as well as regions in Syria. We may well see another humanitarian crisis as civilians flee this fighting. Additionally, as these areas are liberated, victims of attempted genocide who fled or were forcibly evicted are entitled to international support for their claims to property or to compensation for the property they have lost. If displaced persons want to return home, they should be supported legally and actually in that choice. For those who have suffered too much to return to their homes, refugees who have decided to remain in the places to which they have fled, they should be allowed to do so. And the support of the international community will be crucial on both fronts. The world stands at a crossroads. The rich tapestry of religious pluralism in the region must be preserved now, or it will be lost forever. If Christianity disappears in this region, so does the opportunity for pluralism there, and the likelihood of majoritarian theocracy, or something worse, is increased. The threats from such an outcome to peace, stability, development, and security in the region and beyond are substantial. We have a unique opportunity to change things for the better. Never before has the world's attention been so focused on the suffering of these minorities. Never has their plight been so high on the agenda of the world's governments, the vast majority of the world's Muslims, and all people of goodwill. The United Nations can play a vital role in securing a future in the region that helps to preserve pluralism by protecting the victims and refugees, by ensuring the survival in the region of these ancient, indigenous, and religious communities, by punishing the perpetrators, and by supporting the establishment of internationally agreed upon standards of justice, equality, rule of law, and religious freedom. Your Excellency, thank you very much.
Thank you, Supreme Knight Anderson, for your and the Knights of Columbus' passionate defense of Christians and all religious minorities in the Middle East, and for the important evidence you have assembled about the intent behind the violent killing, and for the powerful case you have laid out about the international community's need to ensure that the responsibility to protect, to stop genocide and other violent attacks against defenseless people leads to concrete action, especially on the part of the United Nations. Our third keynote speaker is the Honorable Lars Göran Peter Adoptason, a journalist and a member of the European Parliament from Sweden, who was the main promoter of the recent resolution of the European Parliament against the systematic mass murder of religious minorities by ISIS or Daesh, which is named a genocide. Your Honor, it is my honor to give you the floor.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to be here today. Thank you for the invitation to this very significant event, and a special thanks to Archbishop Osa and the representation at the UN of the Holy See. The very moment when my staff and I understood that we have secured enough political support for the historic genocide resolution in the European Parliament, we said to each other, now let's take it to the United Nations. Well, here we are. At the same time, focusing on persecutions of Christians has not been an easy task. When Al-Qaeda 2011 attacked the Coptic Church in Egypt, the foreign policy advisors and officials of the EU Commission went to great length to avoid referrals to the Christian belief of the victims. The text was amended to include the word Coptic only after intense debate and political pressure from certain EU foreign ministers. 3 years later, in an op-ed article published in a Swedish leading newspaper, I highlighted the fact that Christians in Iraq and Syria were being severely oppressed. I wrote about Christians fleeing the region in alarming numbers, about the risk of extinction of the entire Christian minority, and about Christians as the most vulnerable and persecuted religious group in the world today. The response from representatives of different political parties was indifferent and dismissive. Facts were contested. Personally, I was accused of trying to mobilize Europe in a crusade against Muslims. The list of episodes like this is long, and I believe it's relevant to discuss this, because it sheds light on at least two important factors in today's political context. Factors that somehow clarify the blind eye attitude of Europe regarding the suffering minorities in the Middle East, notably Syrians, Syriacs, Chaldeans, and Yazidis. The first factor is that both the victims and perpetrators are incorrect and not consistent with conventional wisdom. In a worldview influenced by political correctness, Christians are considered colonialists and imperialists, while Muslims are considered oppressed and marginalized. A situation where the perpetrators claim to represent Islam and the victims are Christian believers that goes against the fundamental and widespread post-colonial assessment. An assessment that has been widely adopted by decision makers, by opinion leaders all over Europe. And I believe that we need to openly address this. If we ignore the fact that wrongly or rightly interpreted, religion is essential in the rise of Salafism and Jihadism, we will miss an important perspective. Today we are able to confront the Islamic State. We are able to if there is a political will, to stop this organization and its evil acts. But without accepting that fact that they themselves link their radicalism to the religious interpretation, we will ultimately fail to deal with the roots of the problem. Political leaders, scholars in the Middle East are since long time having this discussion, and so should we. Vulnerable groups, innocent civilians will otherwise pay the price for our willful ignorance. The second factor is about the explicit focus on Christians and Yazidis, which is frequently mistaken for an exclusive and unfair focus on only two specific groups. We know that focus on Christians and Yazidis is based upon very grave and well-founded concerns. These groups are particularly vulnerable and systematically targeted. Repeated testimonies, alarming reports and statements undeniably confirm that they are at risk of being wiped out. But again, let's be clear, our focus is explicit, not exclusive. Protecting victims of persecution and fostering religious freedom worldwide is the topic of this panel. The free world has a responsibility to offer the protection and the security needed for victims of religious persecution. We have a responsibility to assist in their efforts to return to the original homelands. But in order to be successful, in order to foster religious freedom worldwide, we have to challenge our own preconceptions. Muslims in general are not responsible for the atrocities committed by the Islamic State. Collective blame and condemnation of ethnic or religious groups is always appalling. But we have to overcome the fear to engage in a serious discussion on the roots of the persecution of Christians in the Middle East and elsewhere. Ladies and gentlemen, the other day I came back from Iraq. It was my second visit to this broken and war-torn country during the last year. This time I went to Al-Kosh, and a deserted Christian town of Teleskov on the Nineveh Plains. I met with ordinary people. I met with soldiers, displaced persons, political representatives, and church leaders. Generally, I met with brave men and women who have suffered so badly, and without a substantial signal of hope, many of them now consider giving up. Giving up a place where your family have lived for generations, where your ancestors have farmed the land for centuries, that's not an easy thing. That breaks your heart. Comprehension is important, but might be painful. Listening to these stories about human suffering, seeing the consequences of war and expulsion, that is overwhelming, and it broke my heart. It remembered me of what we have to do. Dear friends, let's unite in the effort to comfort and help our fellow human beings, our sisters and brothers. Let's unite in the efforts to get the ongoing genocide at the top of the agenda of the UN Security Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. You have indeed taken your resolution and resolve in defense of Christians and other victims of violent persecution to the United Nations today. Thank you for your moving Thank you for moving our hearts profoundly and for your witnessing, bringing us the witnesses of people on the ground. The final speaker of our opening panel is Dr. Thomas Farr, who is Director of the Religious Freedom Project at the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, Associate Professor of the Practice of Religion and the World Affairs at the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, and former Director of the International Religious Liberty Office at the U.S. State Department. Dr. Farr, the floor is yours.
Excellency, my sincere thanks to you, to all the sponsors of this event, and to all of you who've gathered in this great hall. Our work together is vital to the religious minorities of the Middle East, and also, I will argue, to the security of the international community, including my own country, the United States. The status of Christians, Yazidis, Turkmen, and other minorities in Iraq and Syria constitutes a grave humanitarian crisis, as we know and as you've heard today. Many have fled their homes. Some have died in place, murdered by ISIS terrorists. Some have experienced torture and rape, including children. Many have been betrayed by their neighbors. Some wish to leave the Middle East if they can. Others wish to return to their homes if they can. The flight of Christians from these and other countries of the Middle East has been ongoing for years, but it has accelerated in the past 2 years with the rise of ISIS. Some of the diaspora has found safe haven in Europe and in America and other countries. Among those Christians who remain in Iraq and Syria, virtually all are living courageous lives in distressing circumstances, as you have heard, unable to work and provide for their families and suffering the debilitating effects of uncertainty about the future. Thanks be to God, many of these minorities, Christian and non-Christian, are able to survive and to live in hope thanks to the humanitarian aid provided by NGOs such as the Knights of Columbus, Aid to the Church in Need, World Vision, and many others. Many of these NGOs are Christian-based themselves. The heroic witness of these groups is a reason for gratitude and hope during a season of despair. Our task is to find other, more permanent reasons for hope and other rebukes to despair. Those of us in the West, in particular, with the resources and capacity to do something, must ask ourselves what we should be urging beyond emergency relief for the victims, relief that keeps them alive, but cannot by its nature solve the larger crisis. To adapt a metaphor favored by the Holy Father, we should think of this task as that of a field hospital in the world. Having saved the patient's life, we must now act to ensure he has a way to live, an opportunity to flourish in a society that recognizes and protects the dignity and worth that is given him by God. Unfortunately, strategic thinking about these things has been quite limited in recent years, but that has begun to change. I believe the opportunity for serious strategic planning for a post-ISIS future has been provided by those who have declared as genocide the actions of ISIS against Christians and other minorities, as well as against Muslims who reject ISIS. The Holy Father long ago labeled this a genocide, and he was followed by the European Parliament, to a certain extent, I understand, by the United Kingdom, the House of Commons, and by the United States. The U.S. declaration, by the way, was not at all a certainty until the Knights of Columbus produced the massive legal brief that Supreme Knight Anderson held up a few minutes ago. It has evidence that simply could not be ignored. It was unanswerable. We should all be grateful to the Knights and to the Organization in Defense of Christians who assisted in that effort. Let me note as well that in my view, the proper use of military force against ISIS constitutes a just war as understood in the Catholic tradition. I would hope that recent attempts to attenuate that tradition would not prevail within the Church, but that, to the contrary, circumstances in Iraq and Syria would generate consideration by the Holy See of a formal declaration that the use of force is fully justified under just war grounds. This would send a powerful message to ISIS and to the nations of the world. But the larger point is this. The declaration of genocide and the effective just use of military force against ISIS are both necessary steps in addressing the long-term crisis, but neither is sufficient. Even if we assume that the genocide declaration galvanizes the United States and other nations to take more effective military action, even if ISIS is decisively defeated and eliminated as a terrorist force, we will not have eliminated the problems that gave rise to ISIS. ISIS is a terrible symptom of a much deeper set of problems that we must address if Iraq and Syria are not to become perpetual incubators and training grounds for terrorism, and if Christianity itself is not to disappear from these two countries. Those problems are many and complex. They involve the breakdown of the Sykes-Picot Agreement that defined the borders between Iraq and Syria, a deepening Sunni-Shia ideological war within Middle Eastern Islam, the dominance of revolutionary Iranian Shiism in Iraq, the constant temptation to radicalization of the Sunni minority in Iraq and of Sunni majorities in Saudi Arabia and Egypt. They include deepening economic and political chaos in a region where stability seems increasingly unachievable. If these and allied problems are not seriously addressed, the results will continue to be catastrophic for Christians, for other minorities, and the Muslim majority citizens of the region. They will also be catastrophic for Europe, the United States, and the international community. This is because the flight of religious minorities from the region means the flight of religious pluralism, and with it any opportunity for stability, stable self-governance, and economic development. And so the stakes in the region involve more than protecting the victims of persecution. They also involve the very survival of Christianity and of pluralism in Iraq and Syria, and the very possibility of stable self-governance. While the destruction of pluralism would certainly not be good for Christians and Christianity, it will also do great harm to Muslims, to Islam, and to their opportunity for dignity and flourishing in societies that govern themselves and live in peace with their neighbors. And it will mean that the Middle East, as I say, will continue to be a net exporter of refugees, of terrorism, and of international instability. So, given the stakes to Christians and Christianity, to Muslims and Islam, and to international peace and security, our thinking, our imaginations must be radical enough to meet the challenge. We must plan now for a post-ISIS future, an order that sustains the possibility of pluralism, self-governance, and stability. While there may be other paths to such an outcome, one possibility must be consideration of an autonomous, multi-religious, multicultural, and ethnic safe zone, possibly in the Nineveh Plain of Iraq. Such a zone would provide safe haven to minorities who are not now settled or safe. But if successful, it would also provide a model of pluralism for the rest of the region. This, I think, is a powerful reason for even considering this terribly important idea. The obstacles to it are daunting, I admit. In addition to the elimination of ISIS as a military threat, its establishment would require resettlement or movement of tens of thousands of people, an international security force, an internal police force, economic revitalization, just and effective governance, treatment for trauma and psychological distress, and mechanisms for reconciliation, just to name a few. Surrounding and interested governments would have to support, or at least accept, such an autonomous zone, especially Iraq and the Kurdistan Regional Government, but also Turkey, Syria, Russia, Jordan, Lebanon, and Iran. It's also true that the roughly between 500,000 and 1 million Christians left in Syria, most of them living in government-controlled areas, would be unlikely to move to this kind of zone. So the obstacles are tremendous. And there are other alternatives that might save Christians and other minorities, such as their integration into the Kurdish society in Iraq where they live now. Some Kurdish leaders support this idea. Others do not. Many Christians, including many Assyrians in the region, feel betrayed by the Kurds and would not trust their long-term security to the Kurdish government. So, I fear I've offered no solutions. I will conclude by, however, restating the obvious. There are no easy solutions to this genocidal crisis. The only thing we can be certain about is that we cannot do nothing. We must begin planning now for a post-ISIS future for the people in that region so that we can save Christians and other minorities, preserve Christianity itself in the lands where the apostles walked, and provide for the future security of our own children and of theirs. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Farr, for challenging us to serious strategic planning to defend and assist victims of violent extremism and to provide for the long-term possibility of pluralism, self-governance, and stability in the region. There are, as you noted, no easy solutions, but rather than being an excuse for inaction, it's a summons for us to marshal all the talents and resources we can find and carry out the difficult work needed. I would like to thank all our panelists, Ambassador Ufuk Chen, Supreme Knight Carl Anderson, the Honorable Lars Adaktusson, and Dr. Thomas Farr, and as they are taking their seats on the floor, and the moderators and panelists, the moderator and panelists of our second panel come forward, I would like to thank each of them for their interventions on protecting victims of persecution and fostering religious freedom worldwide. I now turn the second panel over to moderator Mr. Ignacio Azuaga, the president of Citizen Go.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm Ignacio Arzuaga, President of Más Libres and Citizen Go, two of the co-sponsoring organizations of this conference that wants to contribute to stop mass atrocities against Christians and other believers. Citizen Go is an online petition platform of 3.5 million active citizens that defend life, family, and religious freedom worldwide. We launch campaigns many times in cooperation with other like-minded nonprofits in 12 different languages. In the last years, we've been trying to raise awareness about the persecution Christians and other religious minorities suffer worldwide, so that the people of good faith, governments, and international organizations like the UN take action to protect those who are being persecuted, marginalized, or killed because of their religion. In this panel, we will be privileged to listen to the testimonies of such victims of religious persecution. But before we begin, let me invite you to two other events that we have organized as part of the We Are In conference, in case you have not registered yet. Both events will take place at the Roosevelt Hotel, very close to this UN headquarters. Tomorrow, Friday, at 6:30 p.m., we'll show the premiere of Inshallah, Blood of the Martyrs documentary film on persecuted Christians, produced by Citizen Go and Más Libres. And the next day, Saturday, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., the Congress will continue with the testimonies of other victims of religious persecution. So you may find more information at the website of this conference, weareN.org. Our first speaker in this panel is Bishop Joseph Danlami Bagobiri. His diocese is Kafanchan in northern Nigeria. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you. First, a word of commendation to the Holy See and also to Citizen Go, the organizers and sponsors of this very event. Christians do not believe in reprisals, in revenge, in vendetta, and it is on the basis of this that an initiative of this nature should be commended as one way of showing solidarity with those who are suffering globally as a result of their own faith. The thrust of this intervention is to paint a very bleak picture on the impact and devastating nature of persecution on the church in northern Nigeria. The church in northern Nigeria has grown tremendously in the last 100 years. For example, in the year from a zero population of Christians in 1900 in northern Nigeria, today there is a significant Christian presence of about 31% of the entire population that constitute about 35 million people within the northern region of Nigeria. Now, this population is under a lot of and facing a lot of persecutions on different grounds, and what is happening in northern Nigeria has not been made known to the international community, and that is why I believe many Christians in northern Nigeria today are full of joy for the provision of a platform like this, where they can kind of bring to the surface the hardships of the church within this very region. The aim of this presentation is to draw attention of this assembly and through it the international community to the endangered situation of Christians in northern Nigeria as a result of the impact of persistent violence and other forms of heinous persecutions meted to them by Boko Haram and the second group, the nomadic Fulani herdsmen, both of which are organizations of the deadliest type that are bent on establishing a caliphate and also an Islamic State in Nigeria. The description of Boko Haram and the Fulani herdsmen as the deadliest of all terrorist organizations is something that came from Amnesty International and not the coinage of our own selves. The ideas in this presentation are not only my experience, but they are the fruit of a scientific research that was conducted by a group called the Open Doors, with the support of the entire Church of Nigeria under the auspices of the Christian Association of Nigeria, which is the umbrella body that welcomes all Christian expressions under one umbrella in Nigeria. Nigeria, as you know, has a vibrant population of about 170 million people. And it is a very pluralistic society with well over 500 ethnic nationalities. It practices what they call democracy today, even though there is also the element of dual ideology, some effort to combine both democracy and theocracy. And theocracy has to do with the Sharia. The Sharia was surreptitiously inserted into the Constitution by military dictators, and they made the Constitution difficult to amend. And so today we are faced with the problem of dual ideology, a democratic ideology, and having to contend with that of Islam and Sharia. And this is one of the reasons that is responsible for a good number of the problems that we have in the country. Boko Haram and the Fulani herdsmen are terrorist organizations, both of which self-describe as Muslims. They kill, they maim, they destroy properties through bombings, they conduct guerrilla-like attacks and practices, and carry out all forms of discrimination, marginalization against non-Muslims and those Muslims who oppose them. Again, Muslims that stand up and are against it, they are not freed from the attacks of these bodies. The statistics of persecution and violence against Christians worldwide have become unprecedented. We are told by World Evangelical Alliance that 80% of the persecutions being suffered worldwide today are directed and targeted on Christians. I believe many of us can identify with this. Christians in the Middle East, Western, Central, and Southern Asia, North and East Africa have had their own share. But 2014, the year 2014, saw the worst form of violence and persecution of Christians in northern Nigeria. An online magazine with the name Prophecy News Watch estimated that out of every 100 Christians that were killed in the year 2014, 64 of them were Nigerians. And when you talk of Christians being killed in Nigeria, it is not in the southern part, it is in the northern part. In this same year, Amnesty International submitted that Boko Haram was the worst and deadliest terror group in the entire world. We are afraid that if serious measures are not taken to protect the gains of evangelization in northern Nigeria, Nigerian Christians could suffer the same kind of fate of churches as we have mentioned above, from North Africa, from the Middle East, from Central and Southern Asia that used to have one-time flourishing churches that today have been a kind of totally reduced to insignificance. I'm happy that our present Pope has been talking on this issue, trying to bring world's attention to it. In the recent joint statement between Pope Francis and also Patriarch Kirill, we saw how the first statement in that joint statement was on the sufferings of Christians worldwide in the area of persecution. In part, they said, our gaze must firstly turn to those regions of the world where Christians are victims of persecution, in raising our voice in defense of persecuted Christians. So they have been able to recognize this. About 2 Sundays ago, Pope Francis again was in an island called Lesbos, where he jointly made a statement with Patriarch Bartholomew and another archbishop, all trying to highlight this phenomenon of Christians becoming an endangered species that are being pounded and persecuted in almost every part of the world today. Interreligious dialogue is indispensable, they tell us, but they call that the international community needs accurate facts and not propaganda, and this is what this presentation is aimed at giving. There are over 30 million Christians in northern Nigeria, which make up 31.25% of the population. They are a substantial minority. It is on account of this social and religious fact of being a minority that they suffer terribly. The following are quite evident. The politically motivated communal clashes following the 2011 post-electoral crisis, the Boko Haram insurgency in their quest to establish a caliphate, and then the Islamist nomadic Fulani herdsmen invasions aimed at forcefully dislodging and occupying ancestral lands belonging to the Aborigines or the native people of northern Nigeria and also the Middle Belt. Now, what we're trying to say is there have been this concerted effort by the Fulani herdsmen. The Fulani herdsmen invade a community, and overnight they can destroy up to 3 to 4 communities. They can kill up to 100 to 300 people overnight. And we have seen this happen in my own territory where I'm shepherd of, and in 3 main communities. First in Kaura local government area, where overnight over 100 people were killed. Entire communities were reduced to rubble and things like that. Then in another community they call the Sanga, that it also happened in Gwantu and also in Fadankarshi. So these are not fictions. These are things I witnessed. These are things we have taken pictures and we have sent out. But moving a bit out of my diocese to Benue State, we also find recently, some of you might have read this on the media, where the Fulanis again attacked a community with the name Agatu in Benue State, in the Middle Belt area of Nigeria, and overnight over 300 people were killed. You don't even have this kind of numbers being killed either in Syria or in Iraq or in other parts like in France, but you see, we don't get that kind of attention from the world media on the atrocities that are going on in northern Nigeria. Mm-hmm. What?
I'm sorry.
The Chibok girls, you will want to hear something about it. Recently, 3 weeks ago, a picture was shown that of some of them, but don't believe that. You cannot find these 200 girls today. The likelihood you may have up to 10 of them still in Nigeria. Some of them were sold out as sex slaves into distant countries in the Middle East, and then a good number of them were brainwashed, and they become vehicles of suicide bombing to advance the causes of what is happening. I have an over 20-page presentation that I have prepared for this very forum. I will not have the time to kind of make this presentation, probably another forum, but here we wanted to bring to attention the kind of sufferings in which Christians are going through. The research I'm referring to tells us that between the period 2006 to 2014, about 11,000 Christians were killed in northern Nigeria. About 13,000 churches were destroyed. They can no longer be used. Over 1.3 million Christians are displaced people. We cannot even talk on the traumatic experience that a good number are going through. You will not find Christians in the Middle Belt in camps like you find displacement camps, but they quickly melt into the extended family system. In Africa, we have a strong extended family system, and these people who have been driven away from their own lands, they move into this. So these are very startling statistics of the ordeals in which we are going through. We have no problem with Muslims. Our battle is not against Islam as a religion, but we are concerned that those carrying out these atrocities claim to draw inspiration from Islam, and Muslims must be the first to condemn this. But at the same time, this initiative that is being spearheaded by the Holy See and Citizen Go, this is a commendable one. This is one way to show solidarity with those who are suffering, and we hope that this legal, non-violent approach will bring out good fruits in what we are doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Monsignor, for your personal testimony, the word testimony, which is also martyrdom of the persecution your flock suffers by Boko Haram and other terrorist groups in Nigeria. On Saturday, we'll be able to listen again to Monsignor, and probably he'll be able to explain a bit more in detail what's happening in northern Nigeria. I'm honored now to give the floor to Carl Müller and Marcia Müller. They are the parents of Kayla Müller, a young aid worker who was taken hostage by ISIS and killed in Syria. Carl, Marcia, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. First off, we'd like to thank the Permanent Observer Mission of the Holy See for sponsoring today's event. Thank all the ambassadors, delegates of the UN officials here in attendance for your concern about religious freedom and defense of human rights. And a special thanks to Citizens Go for having made all our arrangements to come here today. As he said, we are the parents of Kayla Jean Müller, the 26-year-old humanitarian aid worker who was kidnapped by terrorists in Syria as she returned from a Doctors Without Borders hospital in Aleppo in August of 2013. We understand that the last 5 months of her life were spent as a personal hostage to the self-proclaimed Caliph al-Baghdadi, and that her treatment during that time was as horrific as that suggests. In 2011, Kayla wrote in her blog, "Here we are, free to speak out without fear of being killed, blessed to be protected by the law we are subject to, free to see our families as we please, free to cross borders and free to disagree. We have many people to thank for these freedoms. I see it as an injustice not to use them to their fullest." Kayla believed we each had an individual responsibility, but her hope was in our collective action and used her voice to call out to the world. In 2011, Kayla told us, "I've known for some time now what my life's work is, using my hands as tools to relieve suffering." She also told us in a letter, "I find God in the suffering eyes reflected in mine." If this is how you were revealed to me, this is how I will forever seek you. Helping the suffering was her life's work. While working in a refugee camp in Turkey, she was asked by one of the women, "Where is the world? Where's the world?" Having no answer, all she could do was cry with them. In March of 2013, Kayla posted this on her Facebook. "I want you to tell the world about the situation in Syria. There is no fuel, no electricity, no food. There is shelling, explosions, gunfire, violence. No one is working. There are no jobs. People are just surviving day to day, living for the sake of living. Every human being should act. They should stop this violence. It is killing women and children. People are fleeing. This is too much. I hope that you can tell the entire world what I have said here, what I have seen. I am only one person, but every person will say the same. I wish the world could see the truth. I wish you could. I don't think there is a single child untouched by this war. Everyone has seen death. Everyone has lost someone. It is on such a scale. When the world finally sees what is happening in Syria, when you go to the village beyond those you are allowed into, you will not have the words. Everything is destroyed. A people is destroyed. You will not be able to bear what you see in Syria. We know what is happening, but the world is not listening. We worried about Kayla. We worried about the burden of what she was witnessing, and we worried about her safety. In the spring of 2013, as things in Syria were getting worse, I asked Kayla to come home. I told her this was not her war and not her people, and she didn't need to die for it.
And this is a small part of her response to that because of time. But she did say, there should be no my people, your people mentality in this world. There should be no greater value placed on anyone's life for any reason. I don't think that's idealism. In one form or another, that's what Jesus said. I don't know why we call what is just idealism. I think we place it in that category because we know what is just and we aren't doing it despite being able. We have heard from those also who were held with Kayla. They told us how Kayla retained her religious freedom, finding ways to cope with the demands of her captors, but also deepening her faith and relationship with God. They spoke of her kindness and her strength, of her faith and her compassion. These women courageously smuggled a letter out of prison. In it, Kayla wrote, I remember Mom always telling me that all in all, in the end, the only one you really have is God. I have come to a place in this experience where, in every sense of the word, I have surrendered myself to our Creator because literally there was no one else. And by God and by your prayers, I have felt tenderly cradled in free fall. I have been shown in darkness light and have learned that even in prison, one can be free. I am grateful. None of us could have known it would be this long. But no, I am also fighting from my side in the ways I am able, and I have a lot of fight left inside of me. I am not breaking down, and I will not give in no matter how long it takes. She signed this letter, All My Everything, Kayla. And from a brave Yazidi girl held hostage with Kayla, who escaped in October 2014, we've learned a little bit about Kayla's time as a hostage to the Caliph, held in a house run by Abu and Sayyaf. We learned about the horrors of that time, but also how under unimaginable distress and hopelessness and in total anonymity, how Kayla lived her life, claiming the freedom to be compassionate and to hold on to her faith, the only real freedom she still had. They said she was like a mother or a sister, that while food was often scarce, Kayla would eat only a little, giving them her share. They said that she protected them, putting herself in harm's way to protect them from the physical violence, and tried to hide her pain from them so they would not get discouraged. We do not know when or how Kayla was killed. On February 6, 2015, ISIS tweeted that our daughter Kayla had been killed. Our hearts are broken. We miss her terribly, and we grieve over all she endured. We believe Kayla could have been released and still have many unanswered questions. The one thing we can do is to continue to tell the world about the suffering that she witnessed, to call the world to act with one voice, to protect religious freedom and to relieve the suffering that Kayla gave her life to, refusing to allow this genocide and suffering to be normal. This past January, Nicholas Hennon, one of the French journalists who was in the same prison as Kayla, and the other Western hostages, spoke with Democracy Now! And he spoke of Kayla, and these were his words. He said, "We had to speak the day before we were freed with Kayla Mueller for the first time for 5 minutes. They brought her to our cell. They wanted us to report that she was with us and alive. She explained a bit about what she had been through. She looked extremely brave. She was incredibly courageous. She spent several months in isolation. She had a beautiful inner strength. I mean, she was strong inside, to the point that Jihadi John believed that she had converted to Islam. And she said, 'I just want to correct you. I have not converted.' I mean, nobody would have dared to contradict him, but she did. She was not aggressive, but no, please, I need to correct you. I did not convert. Very calm, but very decided. She was very impressive." Let's see, sorry. From Kayla's letter and the witnesses of other hostages, we know that Kayla did not compromise on what she believed should be her response to the suffering of others, nor on her relationship with God. Kayla believed that relieving suffering of others was a God-given responsibility for each of us. Kayla maintained a steady voice of compassion, and so we believe it is our duty to carry her voice forward, telling the world what Kayla witnessed, encouraging the world to not allow the suffering to be normal. Kayla was one courageous voice, calling the world to speak with one voice and with our actions, to have the same courage and commitment, to give all our everything for the sake of peace, justice, and religious freedom. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. and Mrs. Mueller, for letting us know a little bit more about Kayla, your daughter. She's a great example that gives us inspiration to continue and further our work in favor of the persecuted and in favor of the needy. Thank you. Our next speaker is Father Douglas Al-Bazi, born in Baghdad. He's a Chaldean Catholic Church priest. His parish is in Erbil, northern Iraq. He was kidnapped and tortured by ISIS and then released. Dear Father, it is an honor to give you the floor.
Your Excellencies, dear brothers and sisters, honored guests and sponsors. My name is Father Douglas Bazi, and I am parish priest from Morelia Church and the Center for Internally Displaced Persons in Ankawa, Erbil, in northern Iraq. I'm sorry. Really sorry for your loss. On behalf of my main Christian of Iraq, I thank you, the Holy See and the Citizen Go, for the opportunity to speak to you all today. In this world of constant emergency, it is all too easy for the crisis of the day to be forgotten in tomorrow news. Conferences such as this are critical in making sure that the crisis of Iraqi Christian does not disappear from our thoughts and action. In this opening speech, I would like to raise the critical point which I believe are needed to understand the situation of the genocide against the Christians of Iraq. Christians have been in Iraq for nearly 2,000 years. This is the region where the Christianity was born, and the Christians have contributed in important ways to the culture and achievement of the region. In 2003, we were over 1.5 million Christians in Iraq. Today, we are less than 300,000, perhaps even less than 200. Of this few remaining Christians, half are internally displaced, living in camps, mostly inside Kurdistan region, with a little hope. I too know what the people living in the camps have been through, because like them, I was kidnapped by terrorists and tortured simply because I was Christian. Every day, I look to my bloody shirt. That was, I put it when I was kidnapped. And I don't want to see any more blood of my people anymore. How did this happen to my people? Who bears the moral responsibility of this? What should be done for the Christians who remain in Iraq? And just as important, what should be done for those Iraqi Christian refugees whose lives are on hold in displaced situation in other countries such as Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan? These are questions we must look to answer. As we discuss the disappearance of Christians from Iraq, it is important that we understand the history under which background that explain why this has taken place. This has not been peaceful migration of people simply looking for a better life. No. This migration has been forced, and in many cases, brutally so. The European Union, the United States, and most recently in the UK House of Commons, this persecution of Iraqi Christians has been labeled genocide. And how did genocide affect the Christians of Iraq who have survived? Many people simply fled their homes with the death at their door to any foreign country that they could reach. For most of these people, their situation remains very difficult, and we should not forget them. But what of the people who were able to reach a temporary safe place inside Iraq, but still decided to leave or want to leave now? For those people, the answer is painful and difficult. They do not see any future, and they do not have any hope that a better future will come. Can we find ways to give hope and a future to those who will still remain? Can we find ways to help those Iraqi Christians trapped in difficult situations in foreign countries? This is our task now. We must also discuss another thing, the possible end of the Christianity in Iraq. Friends, I am a priest. I cannot abandon hope. But at the same time, I see reality in front of me every day. My people are losing hope. My people are losing hope. In Arabic, شعبي بدأ يخسر يفقد الأمل. And we are disappearing. Every day our members are growing smaller. Soon we will be small enough for the world to forget us completely. Then Christianity in Iraq will essentially is being gone. Can we change this future? Does the will exist among the good people of this world to change this reality? Has this funding of genocide come in time to make a difference? And what can we do with it now? This brings us to a very important question. Is it important that Christianity survives in Iraq? Of course. There are many who will say, mostly from a distance, that it is important to save Christianity in Iraq for a culture and for historical reason. There is a great truth to this, of course. But friends, the Christians of Iraq were and are living, breathing human beings, not museum pieces. If there is a fundamental reason that they should survive, it is simply this. On our small earth, peaceful people should have the right to live in their homes in peace and dignity. And when the world stands by and watch any peaceful people disappear, it is a wind to the entire world. Over time, the winding will kill us all. On Saturday at the Roosevelt Hotel, I will have a chance to speak to you in greater details about all of these issues. Again, I thank you for your time and opportunity to speak. May God bless you all. And in our language, Aramaic, Tawdi and Shlamad Maria Haumen Nochen. That means the peace of the Lord be with you, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you, Father Douglas, for giving voice to the 200,000, 300,000 Christians that remain in Iraq. We'll pray for all of them. We'll not leave you alone. So the final speaker of our second panel is Sister Maria de Guadalupe, missionary in Syria and a member of the religious family of the Incarnate Word. She's going to speak in Spanish. So you can pick, the ones that don't speak Spanish, you can pick your simultaneous translation device and turn to channel 1. That's English. So, Sister, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. I am Sister Guadalupe from Argentina, and I belong to the religious family of the Incarnated Word, a congregation founded by Father Carlos Bola in Argentina. I have been a missioner in many different countries from the Middle East for over 18 years. 4 of those years, I was living in Syria. I arrived to Aleppo at the beginning of 2011, and a few months later, the war started. A war that nobody was expecting in Syria. Overnight, the armed groups started to seize the people and the cities, and they arrived to Aleppo city. You can see that in the picture. The second city of the country, but we could say that is the most important city, even over the capital, because it is the economic center of the country. So that's how the millenary Aleppo, that was famous in the Middle East because it was known to be like the European city. From one day to the other, it was so converted in ruins. The terrorist groups that arrived to the Aleppo city seized the city and then blocked the city completely. Aleppo was seized for over a year, completely. This means that we ran out of resources. There were no resources. We ran out of fuel, and we couldn't see cars on the streets. We ran out of gas. And these people that had everything, and they could live very well, they could just go out of the street, and they started to take tree branches to be able to cook. We had electricity outrages and water cuts. Since then, we have 1 hour of electricity a day or 2 hours. The water comes 2 hours every 10 days or maybe 15. This year meant the interruption of the entrance of canned food that comes from the big cities and come from the rural areas. Everything. We ran out of everything. We started to survive as we could. Millions of people, rice, pasta, and canned food. The people started to say, they are allowing us to die of hunger and thirst, and the world doesn't know it. So the city was attacked permanently. These groups, terrorists, that surrounded the city and took the neighborhoods, they started to attack the city. There is no place, not one neighborhood of the city of Aleppo that can be considered safe. They shot the bullets, most of all, to Christian neighborhoods and churches. They are the first target. I remember that the first 2 weeks, when this started, we were closed. There were explosions and bombings, and we heard bullets permanently. We couldn't sleep. But these weeks were converted in months, and the months converted in years. And then we learned to live with the war. We got used to go out in the middle of the shooting bombs and bullets, and we got used to sleep under bombings. We have to go around the city very carefully because the attacks are permanent in any place. You have to walk very fast and paying a lot of attention to the noises. Because of the experience now, we can have a distinction of what kind of attacks. We have to take care of ourselves from the shooters that they shoot towards the streets from some Christian neighborhood, so you have to run. This is the daily life. Let's think of the kids. Kids that to play, they gathered bullets and they interchange bullets because that's what they found that they can find in the streets at any place. It's not rare to walk and find a bullet falling next to you. The Christian neighborhoods are those who suffer the most. Besides this, the churches are full. One of our young people says in the parish, all right, let them come in. Let them take the city. Let them behead me. I am a Christian. I am not going to stop being a Christian. Those are our persecuted Christians. They want to give their lives before not saying that they believe in Christ. Look at this woman in a city that was taken by ISIS. This is Christian and was tied on a pillar so everybody can come and beat her. They were beating her to asking her to convert to the Islam, and she said no. And this is very soft. Christians beheaded every single day. Christians crucified. Women raped. Kids put under the ground alive and in front of their mothers. We are missionaries. and we have the opportunity, the possibility to live with the martyrs of our time. This is a privilege. Look at them. Those are the persecuted Christians. Look at those faces. Imagine the suffering that they are bearing right now and see their smiles on their faces. When you ask them, how can you smile in that way? They say this. Before, we were very entertained with the worldly things that we forgot of the important things. Now, the experience of death have made us understand the sense of life. That life is short, really short. And today can be my last day. And this is why I have to live it to the most. And to look forward the things that come after death, because what they want is the eternal life. Look at this woman. Her name is Amal. In Arabic, it means hope. This woman had 4 children. She lost one of the children tragically. The guy had a surgery, very simple surgery in a Christian neighborhood, and he was waiting with his mother Amal to be discharged from the hospital. In that waiting, a bomb came to the hospital. The building shook, and he asked his mother to go and look for help to help them, because they were really close to their house. When Amal came out of the hospital, a bomb came to fall over the hospital, and then she came back to look for her son, and her son was completely dead because of the explosion. Amal cried her son. His name was Noam. But she told me, my son was already prepared to be in heaven. I saw him being prepared to be in heaven. And she told me that when she was fearing that some bombing will come to her house in a Christian neighborhood, this son that is dead now, told her, quoting the gospel, Mom, do not be afraid of those who can kill the body but cannot kill the soul. This is what persecuted Christians live daily. They say, don't worry, kill me. They can take away the heaven from me. You can take my head. You can burn my churches. You can displace me from this country that saw me born, but my soul belongs to God. And when I die, I won't die. At the end of last year, when the Paris bombings, our Christians in Aleppo, Baghdad, where we have also a mission there, they suffered a lot. They were praying for the victims and friends. They find from our side the same solidarity is what they live in Syria 5 years ago and in Iraq from 12 years ago. How can we help then? How do we do? We have to pray, first of all. They need our prayers. Secondly, we need to tell the world what is happening. It's a shame that all of this, it's unknown. In third place, we need to help. And not only materially speaking, but with our commitment, serious commitment of doing everything we can, everything that's in our hands to stop this atrocity. It is not enough with helping the refugees. It is very good. We have to do it, but we have to know that helping the refugees, it's only a band-aid. We are not solving the problem. And while the faucet is still open, we're going to have a lot of refugees still. A teenager from Syria, a kid that talked in the media, and he did it very well. He said, "We don't want to go to Europe. We were very well in Syria. Please stop the war."
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias, hermana, por compartir con nosotros ese sufrimiento y esa persecución por la que pasan los cristianos de Siria. Y rezaremos por ellos, ayudaremos, colaboraremos y lo daremos a conocer en la medida en que podamos. I would like to thank all of our panelists, Bishop Baikovidi, Carl and Marcia Müller, Father Douglas, and Sister Maria de Guadalupe for sharing your testimonies. Please count on our prayers and on our hands. Thank you, Your Excellency Archbishop Auza, for the opportunity to be co-sponsors of this event. It's a privilege to be here. I now turn the third panel over to moderator Kirsten Evans, the Chief Executive Officer of In Defense of Christians. But as the speakers are for the next panel are coming forward, we'll watch a 5-minute video on ISIS and the persecuted Christians produced by Citizen Go. So, thank you.
Letter N means Nasrani. Jesus Christ was from Al-Nasira. So they don't call us Christian. They call us Nasraniyin, like we belong from there.
وهاي النون يكتبوها داعش على بيوتنا المسيحية. ليش؟ ليش؟ يعني أنتم أوادم نحن ما أوادم؟ ها؟
ورا ما سيطروا داعش على قرقوش قاموا يصيحون الله أكبر يطلعوا يا مسيحيين. ورا هاي اضطريت إنه أنا أترك بنتي يعني ورا شوية طلع الأمير مالتهم كان شايلها على كتفه. فأني نزلت قمت أتوسل وألح عليه إنه ينطيني إياها رأسا أشر لي قال لي صعدي على المنشأة قبل ما يقتلوك.
يعني صار يخطفون النساء ويقتلون الزلمة. يعني من كم يوم سمعنا انه عم يقتلوا هذا 11 عم يمسك المسيحي يقول له انت مسيحي يقول له ايه يذبحه.
كل اطفال الدول عندهم حقوق بس اطفال العراق ما عندهم مظلومين ما عندهم لا مدارس ولا يروحون على الكنائس ولا كل شيء ما عندنا. احنا نريد نرجع على بيوتنا نروح على كنائسنا نرجع على مدارسنا.
نوفق إنسان شيدو كي بس مو شخص من داعش فهمت علي شخص حا ومن الدمينا قالوه شوق الحق جدا منية وبس بريئين غير بريئين أطفال غير أطفال مرة غلو في أذن وبصر.
I want to go back to Garagosh. You know, I miss my homeland. Yeah, I miss Garagosh. I miss everything in it.
ودخلوا هذول الوحوش واستولوا على أملاكنا وعلى كنائسنا. وأنا الكاتدرائية مالي هي أول كاتدرائية قلبوها إلى جامع، استولوا على كل شيء نملكه.
السبب لأنه أهليتنا في منهم بعضهم هونيك ما عندهم أراضي، عندهم جيعان، عندهم يعني عندهم كثير شغلات هونيك. أنا عندي بيوتي هونيك كمان، بيوتنا هونيك، وبنخاف من ال11 بنخاف منه.
ناجنا كان همي اغتصاب قربون همي فروت رابون بده هزار هاتا فروت بورقة هاتا فروتن ببينجي هزار هاتا فروتن قيتش يعني عامل 8 و 12 سالي بده هزار فروت معناه كشتنا يعني بمري بوي باشترا كيف شرب يعني بالاخص يزدي كعاده وتقاليد ما
سرداري ما سحرات بنا ما قطرة من نزان ميجي بخواندن ما تقوى من نزان ما إشكالني عين أخوالجا ديني ما راد غالتين تشتقونا ديني ما تقوى ولا نزان تقوى هم بنسر ديني ما وخوادان ويتخوان ما جبيراكن داستين ما كلام جاد كرن مسيرو جاد كرنا وداكي خوارنا دانا ما قطرة هن نسر ديني ما وراد بنا ما فيسبوك ما فيسترنا
Jesus gave to the Christianity a very small part. He said, you are the salt. Always Christians were minority in the society, but they have the effect of the salt. They give taste. I hope that what we are doing in Iraq, it's not worthless. It's very important, not only for our Christians, but for all the society.
خاصة أنا ثواني فجأة بريت قاعد عائلتي ومصابة مرض سرطان، ثواني جرعة كيميائية يوم 29/6 نزلنا ناخذ جرعة كيميائية. قمنا تنظيم داعش، أحد المفارس تنظيم داعش الإرهابي فك معارضنا، فطلب لي منه شرط أني الإسلام ويلا مع الجيلة، فرفض الطلب ديي أما فرضا موت أنا ولكن سيبا صليب مرجع مشيحة.
So come up with solution. The only thing the Assyrians, Chaldeans, Maronites, Melkites, Syriacs want is to someone coming up with solution. Why doesn't the world care about these people? Are we not human beings?
Good morning. I'm happy to introduce to you the final panel of this morning's session. I know the last panels have been very moving and very touching, and I have no doubt that this final panel will continue in that same vein. My name is Kirsten Evans. I'm the Executive Director of In Defense of Christians. We are a Washington, D.C.-based international advocacy organization dedicated to the protection and preservation of Christians and Christianity in the Middle East. Over the last year, we have worked very hard in conjunction with a lot of other organizations, many of whom are represented here today, to push the United States government to recognize the treatment of Christians and Yazidis and other religious minorities under ISIS as genocide. And we are committed to continue doing so in the United Nations and on the international platform. So on behalf of myself and particularly on behalf of the Board of In Defense of Christians, it's an honor to introduce to you today's panel. Christian and Yazidi women and girls, sexual victims of crimes against humanity. Our first speaker is Samia Sliman. She is a 15-year-old teenage girl from Hardan, a small village north of Mount Sinjar. Samia was captured by ISIS on August 3rd. With all of her family when ISIS took over the area. She was in captivity for 6 months and later resettled to Germany. She's going to share with us today some of her experiences and the experiences of her community. So Samia, I give you the floor. And
Today I'm thankful that all of you are here to hear my story and to hear about the genocide that happened to the Yazidis. My name is Samia Sleiman. My age is 15. I'm 15 years old. On August 3rd, 2014, ISIS attacked our village. They took me and my family. They took us captive. My dad, my uncle, and my grandfather are still in captivity. At the time, they took all the men and they handcuffed them. They separated them from the group of women and girls. Women, girls, and young kids took us all to their headquarters in Tal Afar. They confiscated all of our belongings at the time. I was in captivity for 6 months and 12 days in the hands of Islamic State. They raped and violated the girls that were myself and the girls that were with me in captivity. There were thousands of Yazidi girls in captivity in this headquarters. Then they separated us to different groups. ISIS forced us from our areas. They forced us to convert to Islam. They separated us kids from from our mothers, from our parents. During those 6 months and 12 days in captivity, I've seen horrible things. They did horrible things to me and to other girls with me and to the other children with us. They raped as young as 8 and 7 years old girls. Our mothers, because they were old, they killed them. Because they didn't like them, because they were older, they just took the younger girls. They killed thousands of Yazidi men. They just kept the girls as sex slaves. Today I'm here to ask the international community and to tell my story, to ask the international community and the other countries to help us, to help the Yazidi community and other minorities in Iraq and in the Middle East, because these minorities will extinct. ISIS will, eradicate these minorities. We don't have the resources and the forces to defend ourselves like other bigger groups. We ask the international community to protect us and Christians and other minorities in the area. If this continues, there will be no Yazidis, no Christians in that region, because they are suffering. They've been suffering for years, especially those in the camps right now. They don't have the proper and services they need. I hope that the international community, and especially the United Nations, will recognize this genocide against the Yazidis and other minorities. The situation that these minorities are in is difficult at the moment. It's been years, and when I was in captivity at the time. I was 13 years old. They not only raped me but other girls with me. I'm not the only girl that suffered under ISIS like this. There were many other girls that suffered under ISIS. We hope that the international community and all the Western countries will help the Yazidis and Christians and open their borders for them. If they cannot protect them in that region and provide protection for them, they will open the borders and welcome these minorities in the Western world. We see that our people don't have the force and the ability to defend their people, because we are treated as second-class citizens in that country. The Yazidis there are still young Yazidi boys training them in ISIS camps to make them future jihadis to fight with ISIS and brainwashing them. At the time when we were in captivity, they separated all the girls and they sold them to each other. They sold Yazidi girls to each other. They give Yazidi girls to each other as gifts, simply as gifts, and sold them to each other with hundreds of dollars. Why these innocent kids and these innocent people are suffering this much in that region? Why don't we see any action being taken, even though it's been over a year and a half now? We've seen horrible things happen to us minorities, especially Yazidis and Christians in that region, and we don't see that the international community taking concrete actions against the Islamic State. As I said, I hope and I wish that the United Nations will help the Yazidis and others because they need the help right now. This is a difficult time for them. There are thousands of Yazidis emigrating because they simply cannot live there, because they don't find they feel hopeless living in that country without protection. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Samia, thank you. Thank you very much, Samia. Thank you for sharing with us your own suffering and the suffering of your community, and opening our eyes even more deeply to what you and what others have endured, and what the international community needs to do to protect you. So thank you. Our next speaker is Dr. Elisa Van Uden Forgy, who is Associate Professor of Holocaust Studies at Stockton University, Director of the Master's Program at in Holocaust and Genocide Studies, and she's also the Vice President of the International Association of Genocide Scholars, and she has done specific work in the area of the use of sexual violence as a weapon of genocide. So I give you the floor, Doctor.
Thank you, Kirsten. I would like to express my sincerest thanks to the Holy See, to Citizen Go, to In Defense of Christians, and to all the organizers of this conference for bringing us together around this very important subject. It is a great honor to be here and to be able to testify about what I have observed in Iraq. I was in Iraq for 10 days in January 2016 with two other genocide scholars, Irene Massimino and Shell Anderson. We were there to witness ISIS's crimes by visiting refugee camps, mass graves, destroyed and emptied towns and cities, and meeting with religious and community leaders from religious minority groups. While we were there, we were overwhelmed by the trauma and the suffering that has been inflicted on the refugee communities, but we were also overwhelmed by the kindness, the generosity, the hope, the courage, the dignity, and the resolve of the Iraqi people, especially the minority religious communities in refugee camps throughout the country. In speaking with refugees from Christian, Shabak, Shia, and Yazidi refugee communities, what became quickly clear to me is that ISIS is committing an intense form of genocide against all peoples it considers to be unwanted religious and ethnic minorities in the region. ISIS uses many techniques to commit genocide, so genocide is expressed differently depending on ISIS's understanding of the group that it is targeting. For example, ISIS targets the Yazidi with one of the oldest and most well-defined patterns of genocide: the direct killing of men and older boys, combined with the mass rape, enslavement, and expulsion of women, girls, and younger boys. A similarly murderous pattern has been directed against members of the Shabak Shia group, whom ISIS considers to be apostates. Christians have been terrorized, abused, forcibly displaced, and have had all their belongings taken from them, including necessary medicines, the clothes off their backs, baby supplies, and sometimes even their shoes. They have also been kidnapped, raped, and murdered. Sexualized violence against women and girls is an integral part of this genocidal process, as it is in almost all genocides. We know that over 3,000 Yazidi women and girls were captured by ISIS when it overran Sinjar in August 2014. Of those, according to numbers kept by the Yazidi community as of December 30th, 2015, 1,804 are still in ISIS captivity. Captive women and girls are subjected to horrific physical and psychological tortures, and many have been killed or have committed suicide. There are reports of ISIS raping very young girls in addition to adolescents and women. A similar fate, women considered to be too old to become sex slaves have been massacred. A similar fate has befallen the Shabak Shia women and girls, and there are, of course, many cases of Christian women being forced into captivity as well, in addition to the abduction of Christian children. The sexualized violence committed by ISIS is part of a much wider pattern of reproductive violence that is evidence of genocide. Such reproductive violence, which has both a cultural and a biological dimension, is a well-known and efficient genocidal tactic, since the harm done is so deep and extends broadly to the family and the community. The point of genocidal reproductive violence involves destroying a group's ability to perpetuate itself as a strong historical community in the future, and hence it involves the widespread life force atrocities that target the deep bonds and responsibilities human beings feel for one another, as well as the symbols of those bonds. Life force atrocities have been committed against families and communities in Iraq in characteristically cruel and alarming ways. Before being taken captive, many women and children have been forced to watch as male family members are separated from them and killed, including young boys. As we know, ISIS has murdered outright over 3,000 Yazidi men and boys and has captured at least 2,000 more. Families are forcibly separated and young children have been kidnapped to be raised to become ISIS fighters or ISIS wives. These children are terribly mistreated and terrorized and are often forced to commit atrocities. Women have been raped in front of their children. Children have been forced to watch their mothers murdered. Women and children in captivity have been brutally separated from one another. There are reports of ISIS forcing captive women and girls to have abortions. Victims from the minority populations are mocked and humiliated routinely, often in public. ISIS forces some captives, especially young girls, to call their families in refugee camps and report to their families the abuses they are suffering. Before being displaced, many communities have been imprisoned in their homes, starved, plundered, and terrorized on a daily basis. We heard reports of many Christian families who paid the jizya tax and still had everything taken away from them. Some were murdered. Christians who were forced to convert were often not spared displacement, plunder, and even murder. Some who refused were killed. After being starved in their homes, elderly residents of the ancient Christian town of Karakosh, for example, were deprived of all of their belongings, bused to a remote region, and forced to walk alone to the Kurdistan regional government. One mother of 5 had her little 3-year-old girl, Christina, ripped from her arms by an ISIS soldier before the bus left. One elderly and frail woman had to drag her husband most of the way after he harmed his foot and began to lose consciousness. Refugees in Erbil report being called on their cell phones by ISIS soldiers and mocked, humiliated, and terrorized. Alongside atrocities committed against individuals as members of groups, we have the destruction of religious institutions and other symbols of cultural heritage. One estimate I heard recently from a Yazidi leader is that ISIS has destroyed 70% of Yazidi shrines. An assistant to the Syrian Catholic Archbishop in Erbil spoke to us about the Al-Tahira church near his home of Karakosh, which dates back to the 6th century and up until at least January 2016 had only been partially destroyed. I am a son of the land. My name is written on every stone, he said, referencing the deep ties his family has to that place. If it is destroyed by ISIS, he continued, I will leave Iraq. This dense network of terror and degradation, this combination of mass murder, sexualized violence, sexual enslavement, starvation, forced displacement, humiliation, plunder, the desecration of cultural symbols, and the kidnapping of children has all the hallmarks of genocide. Genocide is a complex process that aims to destroy not simply the bodies of group members, but also their identity, their hearts, and their souls. In taking aim at the deeper bond of love and responsibility that tie communities together, as well as the cultural representations of these bonds, ISIS is attempting to eradicate religious and ethnic minorities, not only from Iraq, but also from the face of the earth. ISIS seems to operate in the knowledge that these groups are very small and will have terrible difficulties sustaining their culture in refugee camps or as a diaspora scattered across the globe. In the knowledge of this terrible crime and tragedy, it behooves all of us to work toward the return of refugees to their ancient homes, the rebuilding of what has been lost, and the guarantee of their security. As one Yazidi religious leader said to me, the world is like a flower where each petal is a people. Each petal has its own beautiful color. Do not let the color of the Yazidi people fade from this earth. The same can be said of the color of the Iraqi Christians, the Shabak, the Turkmen, as well as all other religious minorities in the region and in the world who are threatened with dissolution. Let us not let their colors fade from this earth. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Fanyudin Forji, very much for your words and for helping us to understand the sexual violence in the general context of culture, and in this particular context of ISIS, really is an instrument of genocide to destroy not only the lives of individuals and their dignity, but to destroy entire communities through psychological and physical abuse, through the destruction of the family, of healthy social bonds, and ethnic identity and culture. So thank you very much. Finally, I would like to offer the floor to our final panelist of the day, Ms. Jacqueline Isaac. Jacqueline is the Vice President of Roads of Success, which is a humanitarian NGO. She is based in Los Angeles, but travels the world doing advocacy, and just recently came back from the UK, in which she was able to participate in a very meaningful way in helping to move the resolution or the recognition of genocide in the Lord of Commons. So I give you the floor, Jacqueline. Thank you.
I would first like to thank the Holy See for sponsoring such an event. Thank you to Citizens Go, and thank you to In Defense of Christians, because this is a matter of life or of death. I want to tell Mr. and Mrs. Mueller, thank you for speaking about the courage of their brave daughter today. Before I went to Iraq, I had heard the news that Kayla had been murdered. Fox News came to meet with me, and they asked, "You're an American like her. Aren't you afraid that this can happen to you if you go?" But I thought of Kayla, and I thought of her bravery, and I thought of what she stands for. And I was able to answer, no, I am not afraid, because girls like Kayla are a symbol of what each and every one of us should be doing. I stand here today, not as a lawyer, but as a fellow human being. I stand with Samia. I stand with the beautiful, brave, and resilient survivors that I've spent extensive time with in Iraq. Those that saw their parents killed before them and then taken by ISIS and categorized like merchandise based on whether they thought they were beautiful or not, their age, and whether they were virgins, like merchandise. And if that was not enough, they were raped, they were tortured, many committed suicide and died, and others may have attempted, but they survived. And they're standing before us today. They're crying out and they're asking, "Where are you, world? Where are you, world?" We went to the front lines where we were 200 meters away from ISIS. We traveled to the Sinjar mountain to spend time with survivors. My mother, who is the president of the organization, just returned from the war-torn part of Syria in Homs. She returned 1 week ago and testified before the UK Parliament. She learned of something very harrowing. Parents, like many of you today, had children, but these children were in captivity. And they got a knock on their door. They opened that door and they found plastic black bags. The bags had the body parts of their daughters. The body parts of their daughters. And a video. A video of their daughters being raped and tortured. Their parents. Their parents, they're just like us. Their parents, their mothers, their fathers, these are not numbers. They are not numbers. They are just like us. But they're living in an unfortunate part of the world. I promised that I would not leave without sharing their voices before the entire world, not just to hear the stories, but to act. This is a call for action. We need to stand with our fellow brothers and our fellow sisters. A story of a beautiful mother named Rita, Christian woman from Mosul, also got a knock on her door. The ISIS foreign fighters were at the door. And they told her, "You have two choices. You are to leave now or you are to pay the jizya." She said, "I will pay. Give me a few seconds. My daughter's in the shower." They said, "You don't have a few seconds." And they lit the house with a torch from the bathroom that the daughter was showering in. Their daughter had 4-degree burns. And Rita took her daughter, trying, scrambling, doing anything to save her, rushed her to the hospital. And her daughter died in her arms. But do you want to know the last thing that Rita's daughter said? Forgive them. Forgive them. See, in the midst of darkness, there is light. And it is that light that has us sitting here today. Because when there's light, there is hope. Last week, we were before the UK Parliament, and we testified as to the accounts of what we've seen. We also brought a 16-year-old survivor, just like Samia, who had seen her father shot and murdered in front of her own eyes, saw a 9-year-old girl get raped so many times that her body could not take it and she died before her. She saw a mother eating her baby. ISIS killed her baby, grinded the baby and fed the baby to the mother. This is what we're talking about here. And I will tell you something. Though the legal arguments were very important in that parliamentarian decision in the House of Commons, it was the stories of our fellow daughters, mothers, brothers, fathers. It is those stories that moved the House of Commons. In a unanimous vote, they stood and said, this is a genocide. Now, the question is, what does it mean? When we declare that a genocide has happened, what does it mean? I want to share with you what it meant to the 16-year-old witness that came with us and testified. A few minutes after the hearing, we called her. She said, oh God, thank you, God, you heard our cries. This is justice for our people, our honor and dignity returned. That's what that declaration meant to Ikhlas. We then called a mother in Syria who lost her child. And the mother said, our voices have finally been heard. My son's innocent blood shed has not been ignored. Please tell the world to continue our fight until we are safe. Decisions have been made. And the first step, the first victory, is that healing process, that the survivors know that we stand with them. And now it is time for each and every one of you to take your stand. I carried their voices to you. Now carry their voices to the world. Speak to your members in Parliament. Speak at the United Nations. And let's get this referred to the Security Council. And let us see the perpetrators prosecuted in front of the International Criminal Court. We can do it. We can do it. Remember, it's not about them. It is about all of us. I congratulate you for being here and taking the first step. And I look forward to the day where we sit together and see the end of this fight. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you for being the voice of these victims and for bringing their voices to us here today, for bringing their voices to the international community, and for your call to action. It was a very moving way, I think, to end the testimonies of the morning, so thank you. Before I hand the microphone back over to His Excellency the Nuncio, I would like to thank all three of our panelists for their courage and their bravery. So thank you.
And Kirsten Evans for their moderation of the last two panels, and reiterate their thanks to each of the panelists, Bishop Bagubire, Mr. and Mrs. Muller, Father Albatsi, Sister Maria de Guadalupe, Samia Sleman, Dr. Fonjuden Fargete, and Ms. Isaac for their powerful contributions. As our last intervention Today, I would like to give the floor to the Melkite Archbishop of Aleppo, who will give us a short testimony of his experience in Aleppo. Archbishop Jean-Bart, je vous donne la parole.
Excellence, je vous remercie. I thank you because I know that my arrival was problematic and it has made some confusion, and you were not sure that I will be here. A few days ago in Aleppo, bombing has come back, and the violence was terrible, and nobody thought and expected me to be able to leave and come here. It's just a few days ago when I was in this country that you have been able to know that I will be sure exactly here, and that's why you didn't gave me the opportunity to speak longer. But thank you very much that you have agreed and given me the possibility to say and to call all over the world in the name of the Christians of Syria and ask help. I am happy that I have not to talk and to say many things about what we are suffering. Sister Maria Guadalupe has presented what is happening in Aleppo, and other speakers talk about ISIS and what we are suffering. So I'll go and speak quickly and in a global way. In my country, Syria, Christians are caught in the middle of a civil war and are in grave danger. We may disappear soon. We hope that you will listen to our call and give us a helpful hand in relieving our misery. For the past 5 years, there has been much talk about the war in Syria and the violence afflicting the innocent people. For the Church, what is most important is that peace be restored, and that through peace, a non-confessional and pluralistic democracy be established that guarantees all Syrians their God-given rights to live as full-fledged citizens in the country where they were born and where their ancestors are buried. For centuries, Syrian Christians lived peacefully in a society alongside a Muslim majority that was tolerant. There was a cordial atmosphere of mutual acceptance and friendship. This is no longer the case. Syrian Christians are disoriented by the implosion of a way of life that was once quite safe. Christians are victims of a war of destruction led by a foreign element taking advantage of unrest. They have injected arms, money, and tens of thousands of fighters, jihadis, fundamentalists, and mercenaries recruited from many different countries. Aleppo, as you have heard Sister Maria saying, is truly a disaster zone, a humanitarian, material, and economic disaster zone. The citizens of this great, beautiful city with its 7,000 years of history find themselves, after 5 years of senseless war, in a desperate situation. The prosperity that Aleppo enjoyed in the past is lost. Innumerable attacks have destroyed its church, factories, and its flourishing industry, its infrastructures and social and administrative institutions, its commercial areas, its ancient homes, schools, and hospitals. Then there are the countless frustration which the people of Aleppo have had to endure because of siege, particularly the shortage of food and other essential supplies. Since the beginning of this senseless war, the Church has called for an end to armed conflicts and encouraged negotiations to achieve a political solution to this crisis. Of course, we are grateful that a large coalition of nations is committed to stopping ISIS. Nevertheless, at the present time, in both Syria and Iraq, Christian communities, along with other vulnerable minorities, are defenseless against the assault of ISIS. If these people are to survive, the international community must provide better protection and execute a more aggressive strategy. Here, I have to say a big thanks to the Holy Father when he stopped the strike which had to be done to Syria 2 years ago. Across the region, as the fight is taken up against ISIS, the Christians and other minorities are often caught up in the fighting, facing calamities as they are displaced without any provisions for shelter, food, and medical assistance. The emergency needs of vulnerable populations must be more fully considered and met. Once, God willing, ISIS is defeated and a measure of peace is restored to our land, Christians must be able to count on the international community for continued long-term protection. To ensure political stability, it is essential that Christian leaders, both lay and religious, are given a voice and presence at the negotiation table. Christians bring forth a vision inspired by democratic and humanistic values. They can act as bridge between builders between Shiites and Sunnis, and they can help develop a political system that ensures the right of all citizens. Last but not least, Christians, like other people whose lives have been overturned by years of fighting, need practical financial help to rebuild their lives, especially their professional life. That's why we have launched the Build to Stay program in Aleppo, a social development initiative that needs to be supported by Solidarity Fund. On the day when God, with the help of the international community, will grant us peace and stability, this program will gather people and volunteers to build the future of our community. If the war continues, however, and peace is not restored, all hope may be lost for all Syrians, Christians and Muslims alike, and violence and chaos will inevitably take hold in neighboring countries. And I will say that all the suffering we have supported, all the losses, all the martyrs are not very important toward a new society where we may be free to be ourselves, free to be Christians, free to be Muslims, and free to live as we like and as our mind and conscience ask us to live. The price of this future we are looking for, which will be a future for the whole the world and the whole the church, and a future for a new face of the Christian in the Middle East, deserve all the sacrifices we have done. Thank you very much for holding this conference and for giving me the chance to speak on behalf of my people. Thank you very much to all people of goodwill, and particularly to the Pope Francis, who do his what I can to help us and to push nations to work toward peace in our country. God bless you.
Thank you very much, Archbishop Jambach, for bringing to us the voices and the sufferings of all the citizens of Aleppo, minorities, Christians, as well as the majority Muslims. We do sympathize very much with what has been happening there, and especially we are so worried that again the attacks or the bombings have resumed. Please be assured of our solidarity and our prayers. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to conclude today's conference by reading from the very heartfelt letter Pope Francis wrote to the Christians in the Middle East 16 months ago, which summarized not only the sufferings we have heard, but focus also on our response. The Pope wrote to them, "Sadly, afflictions and tribulations in the Middle East have been aggravated because of the continuing hostilities in the region, but especially because of the work of a newer and disturbing terrorist organization of previously unimaginable dimensions, which has perpetrated all kinds of abuses and inhuman acts. It has particularly affected a number of you who have been brutally driven out of your native lands, where Christians have been present since apostolic times. Nor in writing to you can I remain silent about the members of other religious and ethnic groups who are also experiencing persecution and the effects of these conflicts. Every day I follow the reports of the enormous suffering endured by many people in the Middle East. I think in particular of the children, the young mothers, the elderly, the homeless and all refugees, and the starving. This suffering cries out to God, and it calls for our commitment to prayer and concrete efforts to help in any way possible. Your presence is precious for the Middle East. You are a small flock, but one with a great responsibility in the land where Christianity was born and first spread. You are like leaven in the dough. Even more than the many contributions that the Church makes in the areas of education, healthcare, and social services, which are esteemed by all, the greatest source of enrichment in the region is the presence of Christians themselves, your presence. Your efforts to cooperate with people of other religions, with Jews and Muslims, is the best antidote to the temptation to religious fundamentalism, which is a threat for followers of every religion. At the same time, dialogue is a service to justice and a necessary condition for the peace which all so ardently desire. The majority of you live in environments which are predominantly Muslim. You can help your Muslim fellow citizens to present with discernment a more authentic image of Islam, as so many of them desire, reiterating that Islam is a religion of peace, and that is compatible with respect for human rights and favors peaceful coexistence on the part of all. This will prove beneficial for them and for all society. The tragic situation faced by our Christian brothers and sisters in Iraq, as well as the Yazidi and members of other religious and ethnic communities, demands that all religious leaders clearly speak out to condemn these crimes unanimously and unambiguously, and to denounce the practice of invoking religion in order to justify them. Dear brothers and sisters, even though you may not be numerous, you play a significant role. The entire Church is close to you and supports you with immense respect and affection for your communities and your mission. We will continue to assist you with our prayers and with every other means at our disposal. At the same time, I continue to urge the international community to address your needs and those of other suffering minorities, above all by promoting peace through negotiation and diplomacy, for the sake of stemming and stopping as soon as possible the violence which has already caused so much harm. How much longer must the Middle East suffer from the lack of peace? Pope Francis finished his letter by emphasizing, we must not resign ourselves to conflicts as if change were not possible. Change is possible, and we are all being gravely summoned to be protagonists of that life-saving change. Ladies and gentlemen, this ends our conference today. I would like to thank you all. I would like to thank in particular my friend Ambassador Gokchin, who has stayed during the whole time, the whole conference, to all our panelists, and to those who are here because they care to be in solidarity with those who suffer. Thank you very much, and let's continue to express in concrete, in whatever form, be it advocacy or contribution of any type, so that the sufferings of our brothers and sisters, of all those, not only in the Middle East, but throughout the world, could be relieved or could be alleviated, and indeed could be put to an end. Thank you very much.